Hey everyone, my name is Kritish, and I'll be leading the Introduction to React workshop. So, just a quick disclaimer, we will not be covering HTML or CSS in this workshop. Go check out the other ACM Hack Introduction to HTML workshop if you don't know those topics yet. But without further ado, let's get started. So, firstly, what is React? Well, React is, in one line, a JavaScript library used to build fast interactive UIs. So what does that mean? Well, the UI, user interface, is essentially what the user interfaces with. It's what the user clicks on in the web app. It's like the buttons, the sliders, the text, the counters, like all those things that you see on a web app. That's what the front end is. So React is used for that front end development. And people use React because it's component based. So component based means it works in chunks. So let's say we have Instagram, for example. Instagram has posts. Uh, each post is a chunk, and you can go from like chunk to chunk. So you can, and it's helpful because you only have to work with one chunk at a time rather than with the entire web page at once. It's declarative, so that means when you like update the state, as in like for example, you like an Instagram post, it only updates that one chunk rather than updating the whole web page again. So this component-based architecture is really the main reason why people use React. And all these things, working with one chunk at a time, that makes it really fast, along with a bunch of other optimizations. But overall, React is a really good language for front-end development. So who uses React? Well, it's released by Meta in 2013, and Meta essentially made it so that it's very versatile. It works with a lot of different APIs, a lot of different thing like cross-platform things. So that makes it have an enormous ecosystem. And it's not just used by Facebook and Meta, like Facebook and Instagram, but it's also used by people like Netflix, Airbnb, and even our own website, ACM Hack. So it's a very high demand language. Everyone wants to see, especially companies, want to see you using this kind of language or have experience with it. So before we get into actually using React, I think it's good to know what exactly web development is. So there are three main parts to web development. You have the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript. So the HTML is essentially like, if we take a car as an analogy, the HTML is essentially like the bits of metal and like the tires, all these like random, like jumbled up parts that are together in one place. So it's just the skeleton of the web page. CSS is like the styling of the car, so it's the paint job you put on the car. It's like the wood accents you have inside. It's all these things that you make the use to make the website look pretty. And JavaScript is the function, so it is the engine of the car. It's the electronics that make the headlights work. It what it does on the web page is it tells you what buttons do, what happens when the user clicks on something. So it defines really the function of the app. So React is essentially part of the JavaScript layer, JS layer. And when you open your default app, you're going to see app.jsx and app.css. So JSX essentially combines both HTML and JavaScript into like one file. And it's basically where you're going to be doing your high level, like everything stems from app.jsx and goes down into your files. Other files depend on app.jsx. And app.css, although we're not going to be using CSS in this workshop, it's really useful if you want to change the styling of your buttons, like change the styling of your background, your web page. It just makes it look good. And if you want more info on that, you can check out the Intro to CSS workshop. So what is JSX? JSX stands for JavaScript XML, and essentially it is just HTML. It's HTML that can be written inside a JavaScript file. So if you can see the default app.jsx file, you can see in the return, it's essentially just HTML. You can see all the headers, the divs, all these things that you see in HTML. And on the like low level, it does in fact convert the HTML back to JavaScript, but that's not really necessary. All you need to know is that this is HTML. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, app.jsx, that's where you're going to be doing your main coding. So let's get started with our workshop. So the main thing you gotta do is set up Vite and React in your code base. So Vite essentially just makes React a little bit faster, so we're gonna be using that. And let's do this. So open VS Code. So I have here a VS Code with a GitHub repository cloned in, um, and let's run our functions. So npm create vite at latest, and then we're going to call it trivia quiz. So we're going to be making a um, a simple trivia web app today. And we just do our dash 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 dash, and then we can do template React. So that should automatically build it. It's asking us to do experimental things. We don't want to do that. Install with npm, yes. All right. So we can see it's currently running our default app. And if we go into our folders, you can open up Trivia Quiz. You can see it's added a bunch of different files in here. So we can check it out here. Let's hit O, enter, and you can see a default app with a little counter, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So yeah, let's essentially cancel this to run the rest of our functions. So we hit Control C, both Mac and Windows, and do the rest of our functions. C trivia quiz, npm install, npm run dev. And if you ever want to run your React project, you just run npm run dev. That is the main function. So if you hit O, enter again, opens it in the browser, and we get our default app. So let's continue. Let's actually start out with replacing everything inside our default file with some simple code. So let's try that. So navigate to your source folder and go to app.jsx, and we're just going to delete everything in here. And let's replace it all with function app return hello hot h1. There we go. And now don't forget to export your app. So this is essentially telling the main function, main file, what to look for. Boom. Now let's save our file, Control Command S, and you can see it did a little refresh here. So let's navigate back to our browser, and we see hello hot. Move on to our next topic, which is components and props. So what are components? Components are one of the parts that make React basically React. It's essentially a chunk. It's a function that returns JSX. So they're essentially the chunks slash reusable building blocks for the UIs. So you can export these components in export default app to use them in other files. So we just created an app component, and the app component is essentially our entire app, our huge web page. So this just tells the main function what the main big app is. So it's a best practice to actually create a components folder that where you can store your components in. So let's do that right now and create a file inside called questioncard.jsx. So let's go over here into inside source, let's create a new folder. We'll call that components. And inside, let's create another file called questioncard.jsx. So this is going to be one of the trivia questions. So let's create our first component then. So inside questioncard.jsx, let's create this question card component. So we'll create a function, we'll call it question card, and let's return. So importantly, everything inside your return, the HTML, is going to be inside these parentheses. So let's make those parentheses go out, and let's write our HTML code. All right, perfect. So we've got our question written down, and now let's export our function or our component. So we do export default question card. Perfect. All right. And now what we can do is actually use our component in app.jsx. So the way we do that is import our component and just like this. So let's do that here at the top of the file, import question card, and you see it writes it out for me. I found it in components, but it's essentially the file path of your question card.jsx file. And here, what we can do is actually just use our file. So we can do write a question card, and that is it. And I think I have forgotten my parentheses, so let's do that. And we gotta wrap this in a div. There we go. Let's make sure everything ended it. All right. And now let's save our app and check out what updated. So we see a question card with our with what we can put hard coded into our function. All right, so now let's move on to the second part, props. So essentially, what we have is a component here that will never change. We in fact want this component to change based on what we pass into it. So props essentially are kind of like the function parameters where you can pass data to components and make them change based on the result. So let's create some props. So in question card.jsx, let's add in a question prop where the output will change based on what question we pass it. Let's do that now. So let's go to question card.jsx and modify the question card. Curly brace. And now instead of passing in this hard-coded thing, we can pass in curly brace question. Perfect. And I saved it, and let's go over here, and you can see that there's all right. I saved it, and let's go over here, and we see that we don't actually have our question. So why is that? Well, in app.jsx, we actually have to call call our question card with our question. So let's actually use our question card. So in this question card call, we can set a question equal to question equals, and then we can set that to our question, which is what year was React released. Okay, let's save that and go over here. And as you can see, we have our code working. So let's actually start mapping our questions to answers. So as you can see, currently we have our unordered list, and we don't really want to do that. We want to actually make it take in a JSON of a bunch of questions. So let's actually create a little a template, essentially a JSON for what our question will look like. So in app.jsx, I'm actually going to make a questions array. So questions equals an array, and we can make this a JSON. So we have JSON here and each question will have a text. Our text is going to be what year was React first released. Let's copy that in. It's going to have answers, which is all going to be an array. Put in our 20. Let's copy over here. Delete all that. And we're gonna have the correct answer. Correct. It's an array. Okay, so what we're gonna do now is actually use something called a key. So a key essentially will pass in, or it's gonna basically be a key value pair. If you guys have used hash maps before, it's gonna map our each of the values in our array to a answer. So let's do that right now. Let's go over to question card.jsx. And the first thing we're going to do is actually change this question here. So previously question, was a piece of text, but we're actually going to change that to question.text. Um, question.text. Do- Oh, I see. So here we got to change this to questions at index 0. I'll curly brace that. Index 0. Yeah, prevent those errors. All right. So now we have question.text up here. And inside this list, instead, we could actually do a map instead. So let's create our map. We can map question.answers. All right. We just mapped our answer or our questions to answers. Um, and we mapped that into a list item. So that should be everything. So let's check on our wait. Oh, I forgot to comment questions here. Let's fix that. All right, now let's reload. And as you can see, we have the same file up here. So this is essentially we mapped our questions to answers. So now what we gotta do is actually turn these options into buttons. So in our file or in our main pro browser here, we just have like a bulleted list of 2010, 2013, all those. Let's actually change those into something we can click on. So let's create a component, call it answer button, .jsx. And we can all we're gonna do is it's gonna be a button, HTML button. So let's create that. Answer button is gonna take in a prop of answer. All right. And now we've created this, let's go over to our question card and actually import our answer button in. So we're going to import it the same way as we did for app.jsx. Okay, so now that we've imported our answer button, we're gonna instead change this list item to an answer button. So let's change that to an answer button. And currently we have we will change that. And currently we just have it have a answer as its text, but since we now made a prop inside answer button of answer, we actually have to pass that prop in. So we have a key prop and an answer prop. Answer equals answer. And we'll delete all this. All right, perfect. So now if we go back to our main thing, we see we have some buttons that we can click. Perfect. So let's take a moment to check out the structure of our app. So we have at the top app.jsx, that's this file here. App.jsx essentially has all this big structure of our app. It has the the header of hello hot, and one question card. Um, and an inside question card, which takes a prop of a question. Currently taking the first index of questions. Um, Question card will display question card on the screen. And inside question card, we have answer buttons. So we see inside each question card, we call an answer button, which takes in a prop of an answer. And that answer is displayed on each button over here, 2010, 2015, 2016. So let's move on to part three, state and event handling. So essentially, let's first talk about state variables. This is the second part of React that is one of the core aspects. It's essentially a variable that allows you to keep track of changes. So for example, if a user clicks a button, you want it to do something. So what you do is you change a state variable that allows you to change that, um, change an item or do something in the code. So whenever a state variable changes, a component re-rendered. So if you think about our Instagram posts, if you click the like button on a post, it'll turn that heart red, right? And if you unlike the post, it'll make the heart clear again. So that's what a state variable essentially does. On the back end, there's a state variable handling if the post is liked or not. So let's actually start using some state variables. So this is how we essentially use state variables. We import the useState library from React, and what that does is it allows us to use this useState function. So the useState function, it takes in an initial value for the state variable. It returns two values, a state variable name and a function that you can use to update the variable. So with this line of code here, what we will do is actually create a variable called selected and create a function name called setSelected that can modify the selected variable. Now let's use our button's onClick handler to actually make a variable change. So let's go into answer button and actually add our onClick functionality. So let's go into answers button and we can add our onClick here, onClick, and we can do our onClick. And we actually have to pass in a prop here up at the top. So we can pass in an on-click prop. Now, let's go over into question card and actually use the state variable. So firstly, we have to import state from React. State from React. And let's create our constant variables. Const. Right, we have our two variables, and now let's create a function that actually handles this. And let's pass in answer for that. So you can see here, handle select calls the modifier function or the modifier function for for the selected variable. We call set selected for answer. Um, and now let's actually add our on-click functionality over down here, or our on-click call for answer button. So on-click, and we can do a little bit of syntax. Okay. And finally, let's actually add some feedback so that we can see if our state variable is changing. So let's go down to the kind of bottom above the div and create a little bit of text. Selected, and we can just curly brace our selected state variable. let's try this code out. So, oop, I misspelled selected. Here we go. Okay, so we can see if we click any of these buttons, we can see the state variable is changing. The state variable of selected is changing. So now let's do some live coding. So we're going to accomplish three things, essentially using everything that you've already learned. We're going to be tracking our score. We're going to be moving through some questions, through each different type of questions, and then showing like a pretty simple result screen. So let's do that now. So inside app.jsx, let's add a second piece of state and increment it whenever the user is right. So let's call this one score. So inside app, let's create a const up here. Const. Our variable name is score, and our modifier function is called setScore. And we'll say use state. We'll set score to 0 initially. Alright, and now let's create a function that we can use to handle what happens when the score changes. So function handle correct answer. And we can call the setScore function and increment it by 1. Change score. Okay, so now let's create the onCorrect actual function inside question card. So let's go here, and obviously, we want to, when we're going to be calling onCorrect, when we actually select our answer. So it should be a part of the handle select function. So first we're going to set it like we have our set selected up here, but then after that we got to check if our question is, or if our selection is actually correct. So let's actually create a quick if statement here. If our answer, which we pass in as a prop, or is equal to, or triple equals, question.correct. Okay, then what we do is we tell the parent that the user actually got it right. So how do we do that? We just call the onCorrect function. So essentially what's happening here is that app is calling question card to actually to whenever the selection is created, but then question card sends the result back to app whenever the user gets the right answer. So now that we have something that actually increments score, let's create something that shows that score to the user. So I'm just going to create a quick piece of text that says score and shows our score state variable. So let's try out this app. So we go over here, we save our app, and we see our score is 0. So when we select the wrong answers, nothing happens to the score. When we select the right answers, our score increments by 1. Awesome. So now let's try actually adding multiple questions. So let me just add another question here. Okay, so I've created another question here. So now let's try to actually track the current question. So the way we do that is also by creating another state variable. So let's create another state variable here, and let's call it the current index. So we're tracking the current index of the question. And we'll initialize current index to 0. So now let's create a current question, just for simplicity's sake, that stores the JSON for the current question associated with the current index. So let's create const current question. Let's set that to questions and index current index. Okay, and now all we gotta do is just replace our questions equal to current question. And we can also just add something into our text here to make it store a question. So we can say question number, question, and we're going to put in current index plus 1 because index starts from 0. Okay, so now let's try running our app. So I've just saved all my things, and you can see if I refresh the app, we have a score and a question, and yeah, that works pretty well. But let's say we want to actually move on to our next question. So how are we supposed to do that? Well, inside app.jsx, let's actually create a function called handle next. So let's do that right now. And what it's going to do is it's going to set our current index to 1 plus the current index. And now we're going to pass in another prop to our question card. So our question card will contain an on next, and with the result of doing an on next is just going to be calling our handle next function, which is going to increment our current index. Now inside question card, let's add our on next prop and actually utilize it. So on next. So let's actually add in our next question button. So what we're going to do is add in some JavaScript code into this HTML section. So we do that using curly braces. So we only want to show this button after we actually select an option. So this is how we do that. Selected, so if selected. Then we show the button. So let me create the code for showing the button. And so what we're going to do with this button is actually when we click the button, it's going to change this on next up here. So remember on next, what it does in app.jsx is it calls the handle next function up here. So let's go back to question card and let's go change our buttons on click. On click, we just run on next. So let's check in on our app. Let's go over here and let me refresh. And as you can see, when there's no button selected, there's no next question. But when we select an option, next question shows up. So if we hit the next question button, everything changes. Our question card updates, and we see the second question. Okay, so now that we're here, let's create something that'll tell us if we've reached the end of the quiz and shows as a result page. So let's create a is finished constant boolean that will tell us if we have reached the end of the quiz. So up in app.jsx, let's create that right now. Const is finished. And we'll set that to if the current index is greater than or equal to questions.length. Okay, so now that we have our is finished boolean, what we can do is actually something called conditional rendering. So this is essentially a fancy way to say do an early return if you've reached an if statement. So what we're going to do here is create an if statement right here. If is finished, then what we're going to do is do an early return here. Return something, and we're going to create this later. Return score screen. Okay, so what this essentially does is instead of like rendering past the is finished, it actually ends it right here and it just shows a score screen instead. So none of this code is executed if we have is finished equal to true. So this is one of the core aspects of the rendering in React. If we meet a condition, do something before running the default code. So let's build score screen. So what we're going to need for score screen is a couple things. We're obviously going to need the score that we got, right? So score equals, and we can set it to score. And then we're going to need our total. So total is equal to questions.length. So this is how we can say you got like a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10, something like that. And we'll do this to end that off. All right, so now let's actually build out score screen. So it's just going to be another component. We've done this before. Score screen. Okay, now let's write our function. So function score screen. We pass in two props. Okay, and now let's actually think about this. So, what we're gonna do is we're gonna return a message at the end of the score screen. So this message is gonna contain the score that you got, and we have to calculate that score somehow. So the way we calculate that, obviously, it's going to be score divided by total. So let's create a variable that does that. Okay, and now we have a percentage. Let's write our return. So let's return our HTML. We write some divs. And now we can display what score the user got to the user. So let's write them their score, divide by total, correct? And we can give them their percentage. Okay, so we have a percentage. Now we have to do one more thing before we continue. We actually have to create a button to restart the quiz, obviously. So let's just do that right now. Let's create a button. And let's say play again. And here we actually have to create something new for the on-click. On-click, we have to do the same thing that we've been doing in the past, actually create another prop up here. And we can call this one on restart. So on click, we do the on restart. All right, so we have to, also let me export the app, export default score screen. Okay, so back in app.jsx, we have to implement the on restart. So let's do that. We can write a function again called handle restart. And here, what we're going to just do is set the score to 0 and set the current index to 0. So that's why state variables are so nice to use. All you have to do to just like completely refresh the page is just set these things to their original values, and React handles all the rest. That's one of the main reasons that React is really good. It's just clean. Like something like this in vanilla JS would take a really, really long time. So now all we gotta do is pass down the on restart into our score screen. So we can say on restart equals handle restart. Okay, now one more thing before we continue, we just have to import our score screen as the final thing before our app's complete. So let's import score screen. Okay, let me just check for any issues. Okay, I did find one issue. Here in on restart, you do need to not use parentheses here. You just use the function name. Okay, other than that, I think we should be complete. So let's run our app and see the final product. So what year is React released? 2013. Who created React? Meta. And we see quiz complete. That's our score screen. Now let's try hitting the play again button, and it goes back to the original page. So let's wrap up what we've learned so far. So far we learned about components, props, states, and events. These are the four things that really you need to create the skeleton of a React front end. But that's not the only thing that you can do in React. We obviously can do CSS and styling. That's the entire other section of making your app look good. Um, Use effect, React Router, Next.js, other more advanced React topics, and in fact, React is part of the MERN stack. So this is one of the like pretty modern ways to create a full stack web app with a whole database and a front end that users can interact with. So if you want a jumping off point from for to use in future projects, I recommend using the Mern stack. And that's pretty much all I have for you. So thanks for watching this workshop and happy hacking.